Bibliophiles of the internet. Today I'm here to talk about the books that got away, the 2025 releases that I sadly was not able to get to in 2025. I made a similar video to this last year, but with 2024 releases, and not only was it a nice way to refresh myself on some exciting books that were no longer considered front list, but it also served as a really good reference point. While I may not have read every single book I mentioned in last year's video, I did go back to that list quite a few times, and I was able to read a handful of those books thanks to that reminder. So I figured, why not do it again? I know with a new year, we all get distracted with the new, shiny, upcoming forms of media that we have to look forward to, myself included, but I think it's also good to look back and reaffirm that these titles are still very much on my radar. Just to be exceedingly clear, this is not a set-in-stone TBR that I have to read this year. There are no hard deadlines on when I need to read any of these books. We're just having a good time here. So let's do that and talk about some 2025 releases. These are organized by release date, by the way, starting with On Thin Ice by Jessica Kim, which came out on February 25th. This is a middle grade novel about 12-year-old twins Phoebe and Dexter who could not be more different from each other, but the one thing they do have in common is that they love the ice. Phoebe does pairs figure skating and Dex is on the hockey team, but when Phoebe's partner injures his knee just 2 months before the competition circuit begins and Dex gets cut from his team after being replaced by a new hotshot goalie from Canada, their mom suggests that Dex fills in for Phoebe's partner so that she can compete. There's some more layers to this. The two siblings are also not really close, especially after their father passed away, so they're navigating grief as well. I really love Jessica's debut, Stand Up Yumi Chung, which I thought was such a great book, so I've been really wanting to read more from her, and I think this just sounds fantastic. On a very different note, I also missed out on reading When We Were Real by Daryl Gregory, which came out on April 1st. This is a zany sci-fi story about two best friends, JP and Doolin, who've been best friends for decades. But when they find out that JP's cancer has aggressively returned, they decide it's time for one last epic adventure. So they decide to go on a week-long bus tour to see what are known as North America's Impossibles, the physics-defying glitches and geographic miracles that started appearing 7 years earlier when it was revealed that our world is nothing more than a virtual simulation. I love bizarre, strange sci-fi stories that are just ever so slightly off-kilter, and I feel like that's exactly what this is. It's also described as a madcap adventure populated by a whole host of weird pilgrims who join this tour along the way, and it just sounds like it would be something really fun to read. Another 2025 release I find myself constantly thinking about is Awakened by A.E. Osworth, which came out on April 29th. I believe this is a debut from a trans author. It's a contemporary fantasy story about a queer New Yorker named Wilder who one day discovers that they can magically understand every single language. And shortly after that, they are taken in by a small coven of trans witches who have all awakened their own magical abilities. But just as Wilder is finding their footing, a malicious AI threatens to dismantle the delicate balance of the coven and the world as they know it. This sounds like exactly my kind of book for so many reasons, and as if that wasn't enough, I'm pretty sure I remember the author saying that this book was their very deliberate middle finger to J.K. Rowling and TERFs everywhere, which is perhaps the greenest flag in existence. Switching gears again, a 2025 release I heard nothing but glowing reviews for all year long, and even now continuing into 2026, is for A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle, which came out on June 3rd. This is a literary, queer, coming-of-age, sliding doors kind of story. It's set in Australia during the 1970s and sort of follows two different narrative routes, from what I understand, in regards to two teenagers who have to decide between finally giving into their queer desire or suppressing it and just staying the course of their lives. So the story is split into two limbs. The first follows a teenage girl who was caught kissing her neighbor and then was kicked out of her home, and she eventually finds herself at a communal home in Sydney called Uranian House. In limb 2, that same teenager pushes down her queer desire for her best friend instead and eventually goes to university and studies English. So it's about how these two limbs both converge and diverge over years and years and years until they eventually collide in some way. Every time I hear about this book, I am just fascinated. I have to know how the two disparate timelines or lifelines are structured. I have to know how these two characters or branching storylines eventually collide and what happens to the couple in the end. And I do absolutely plan to eventually find out. Then we have Archive of Unknown Universes by Ruben Reyes Jr., which came out on July 1st. From what I understand, this is a Latinx speculative story, possibly sci-fi. It's about a couple, Ana and Luis, whose relationship is on the rocks, even though the fact that both of their mothers fled El Salvador during the war around the same time is one of their strongest connection points. In her search for answers as to where they went wrong, Ana decides to use this technology known as the diffractor, an experimental device that allows the user to peek into alternate versions of their lives. And what she finds leads the both of them on a quest through Havana and San Salvador to uncover the family's histories they're desperate to know, and to see if what might have been could potentially fix what is. Ruben Ruben Reyes Jr. is an author whose work I'm very much interested in. His debut short story collection has also been on my TBR for quite some time, and I think this debut novel of his just sounds really intriguing and mind-bending in the best possible ways. I also have not forgotten about Hot Girls with Balls by Benedict Nguyen, which came out on July 1st. I believe this is a debut novel written by a trans woman, and it's meant to be a deeply satirical story about two indoor volleyball stars who are rivals balancing unspoken jealousies as well as an off-court romance. I believe it's about two Asian trans women, Six and Green, who both play indoor volleyball, and they're actually both playing for the Men's Pro Indoor Volleyball League, even though they're both playing as women. So they're having to grapple with that dynamic. They're traveling all around the world to play matches, trying to stay in touch with each other, and also navigating the delicate balancing act that is sharing a romantic relationship with the public. This was easily one of my most anticipated 2025 releases, and I'm so bummed with myself that I didn't get around to it. I love queer sports books so much, and not only is it refreshing for the spotlight to be on a sport that a lot of books don't often incorporate, but I also love a good trans satire, and that sounds like exactly what this is. Another book I had on my radar last year was Sky on Fire by E.K. Johnston, which came out on July 22nd. This is a YA sci-fantasy book, I believe. It's about a character named Morgan who is a science prodigy at a university full of mage scientists, but what sets her apart is that she actually doesn't have any magic. However, her research has potentially devastating implications for the Empire itself, and yet she can't find anyone who will take her seriously, much less actually fund her prospective research expedition. Eventually, her work catches the attention of a rebel group who hope that what she's researching could turn the tide in their favor, but when they try to recruit the young scientist, they find that they might be getting much more than they originally bargained for. I believe this is set in the same world as another book from this author called Etherbound, but I'm pretty sure they can be read individually and both stand on their own. I just love a good sci-fi romp. I love ragtag crews of misfits in space. I love when authors blend fantasy and sci-fi together in really interesting ways, so I would love to eventually read this. Speaking of magic, I've also heard delightful things about The Entanglement of Rival Wizards by Sarah Roche, which came out on August 26th. This is the first book in a new series of fantasy romance companion stories from Sarah Roche. This one is about Sebastian, a human, and Alethior, a half-elf, who both happen to be finalists for the same magical research grant. For Sebastian, the idea that this snobbish half-elf who comes from old money taking his grant is the most offensive idea he can think of. But what might be even worse is the possibility that they could both be awarded the grant on the condition that they work together and combine their research. I read The Nightmare Before Christmas by the same author and quite enjoyed it. While I do think the world building could have been much stronger, at least in terms of the characters, the chemistry, the romantic dynamic, it was a super fun read. So I'm really excited to see what Sarah Roche can do in this academic rivals to lovers space. 2025 was also very much the year of the Lady Knight, which is a special area of interest for me. So one of the headlining Lady Knight books of 2025 that I still need to catch up on is The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bavlino, which came out on September 23rd. This is a fantasy romance about Gray Flynn, who's dedicated her life to her mage, Kier. She is his blade on the battlefield, his healer, his protector, and the literal raw power within her is his to use. When a quest to protect a child of an enemy kingdom pulls them into the heart of a treacherous war between two nations, the two of them will have to decide what they're willing to sacrifice to protect their secret, which is that Gray is not simply a living font of magic, but actually the source of all power in this land. And if she dies, then all magic dies. Honestly, I don't need to know anything else. Bleeding Heart stories about devotion and undying love are absolutely my Achilles heel. There's so much about this story that intrigues me, and yes, I do view the fact that I haven't read this yet as a major moral failing on my part. While we're on the topic of really buzzy fantasy books, I do really want to read Red City by Marie Lu, which came out on October 14th. This is set in a world where alchemy is an open secret. There's an alchemical power wielded by the crime syndicates of this world known as sand, which is basically a drug that enhances the user and turns them into a more perfect, beautiful, charismatic, powerful version of themselves. In Angel City, where the story is set, alchemy is pretty much exclusively controlled by two rival crime syndicates, but two childhood friends, each belonging to one of the warring syndicates, form a very deep relationship that could potentially change everything. While I do think there are a lot of plot elements here that overlap with Jade City in a way that I wish was a bit more differentiated, at least on the surface, I've heard nothing but fantastic things about this. There's so much about this story that appeals to me, even though I've never read anything else by Marie Lu, and I have no plans to change that. And the audiobook cast is honestly a powerhouse lineup with Andre Santana, Eunice Wong, Natalie Nadas, and Sid Sagar. So I'm even more excited to listen to this. October 14th was apparently a big release day because that was also the pub date for Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift. This is a debut fantasy novel pitched as The Witcher meets Howl's Moving Castle in a fairy tale of revenge, redemption, and friendship, perfect for fans of T. Kingfisher and Naomi Novik. The story follows Lissa, whose brother was tragically murdered by a fairy-made monster known as the Beast, and she's sworn to find a way to destroy this immortal creature and finally avenge his death. But in the 13 years that have passed ever since, she has had no luck in tracking down the Beast, until she meets Alderic Casimir de la Ront, a melodramatic dandy with a coin purse bigger than his brain, who just so happens to have tracked down the monster's lair and retrieved one of its claws, which Lissa needs in order to forge a magical sword that could finally kill the Beast for good. Again, so many great buzzwords here that just really solidify the fact that I need to read this book. I love the idea of this tough, murderous character being forced to team up with a fanciful, over-the-top himbo. It just seems like it's going to be a really fun, whimsical story about adventure and vengeance, both of which I happen to love. I've also been very intrigued by The Works of Vermin by Hiran Ains, which also came out on October 14th. This is a fantasy horror story set in a metropolis carved into the stump of an ancient tree, and in its roots, gangs of exterminators hunt a colossal worm with a voracious appetite for beauty. The main character, Guy, has one goal in life, which is to keep his sister out of debt, and to do that, he is willing to take on any job that comes his way, even if it means becoming an exterminator himself. His latest quarry is a worm the size of a dragon with deadly venom and a ravenous taste for artwork. It's a creature that's so dangerous, no sane person would pursue it if given the choice, but Guy doesn't exactly have a choice. I honestly don't even know where to begin with this one. It sounds vile and disgusting and strange, which are some of my favorite descriptors. I haven't seen too many people picking it up yet, but those who have definitely seem to be fans, and I just want to be one of them. Speaking of authors I really want to be a fan of, Ken Liu came out with a new sci-fi book last year called All That We See or Seem, which, you guessed it, came out on October 14th. Ken Liu is most well known for his epic silk-punk fantasy series, The Dandelion Dynasty, but this is a new sci-fi series starter about an orphan hacker named Julia Z, who gained notoriety at the age of 14 for her technological prowess. But her solitary life is disrupted when a lawyer named Piers barges into her life wanting her help in figuring out what happened to his wife, who was kidnapped by dangerous criminals. Turns out his wife is what's known as a dream artist who can weave the waking dreams of audiences together through a shared virtual landscape, but she's also been providing a one-on-one dream experience for the head of an international crime enterprise, who's now demanding his dreams in exchange for her life. Listen, I don't know what any of that means, and I know I should concern myself with reading the Dandelion Dynasty books before jumping into a new Ken Liu series, but the heart wants what it wants. I am constantly craving trippy, mind-melting sci-fi stories, and I trust Ken Liu to deliver on that brief in every possible way. Keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive list, it's just a mixture of titles I pulled from based on nothing more than my whims, but with that said, lastly for today, we have When They Burn the Butterfly by Wen Yi Li, which came out on October 21st. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this book before because it has a killer tagline billing it as a fantasy debut that's Silvia Moreno Garcia meets Fonda Lee. Enough said. It's set in Singapore during the 1970s when the city is newly independent and full of immigrants trying to assimilate to a quickly modernizing world. And the city is also full of gangs who are the last conduits of the gods their ancestors brought with them. The main character, Adeline, can summon flames on her fingertips, but when her mother dies in a house fire and her corpse is found with a butterfly seared into her skin, Adeline's only lead on what really happened is a girl she sees in a back alley bar fight who has a similar butterfly tattoo, and by following this girl down the rabbit hole, she discovers that she's far from the only person with magic. I want to read this so bad. It has a great pitch, it has great comps, I love historical fantasy, I love any kind of magic or power that even remotely reminds me of one Roy Mustang, which this definitely does. It's also queer, I believe sapphic specifically, so I just don't see what's not to like. Like I said, this is just a random collection of 2025 releases that I wanted to show some love. It's the very tip of the iceberg where my never-ending TBR is concerned. But of course, if there are any other 2025 book releases you think I missed or that you're still excited about, I would love to hear all about them down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.